The sound of shattering glass echoed through the Prairie Rose Saloon in Julian, California. And Amelia Wright knew her father had just gambled away something far more valuable than money. She stood in the corner of the smoky establishment, her fingers gripping the worn fabric of her cotton dress, watching as her father stumbled away from the poker table with his head hanging low. The year was 1872, and the small mining town nestled in the Cuyamaca Mountains had seen its share of desperate men. But Henry Wright had sunk to a new level of depravity that even the hardened miners found distasteful. "I cannot cover the debt," her father slurred, his bloodshot eyes unable to meet those of the saloon owner, a portly man named Chester Grimm who ran the establishment with an iron fist. "But I can offer something else." Amelia's heart dropped into her stomach as every eye in the saloon turned toward her. She was 22 years old, and though life on the frontier had been hard, she had maintained her dignity despite her father's increasing descent into alcoholism and gambling. Her mother had died 3 years prior from pneumonia, leaving Amelia alone with a man who had loved his wife so deeply that her loss had broken something fundamental inside him. "Your daughter." Chester's voice dripped with a mixture of surprise and calculation. "You would leave your own flesh and blood to settle a gambling debt." "Just until I can get the money," Henry said, but everyone in that room knew he was lying. He owed over $300, a fortune for a man who could barely keep food on the table. Amelia wanted to run, to flee into the California night and never look back, but where would she go? She had no other family, no prospects, and no money of her own. The frontier was unforgiving to women alone. "Done," Chester said, his thick fingers drumming on the bar. "She works here now. The debt is settled." A wave of nausea washed over Amelia as her father shuffled out of the saloon without so much as a goodbye. She had become property, payment for his weakness, and the shame of it burned through her chest like wildfire. "You will start tonight," Chester informed her, his breath reeking of whiskey and cigars. "The rooms upstairs need tending and the men need company." "I will clean and serve drinks," Amelia said, her voice steadier than she felt. "But I am not that kind of woman." Chester's laugh was cruel. "You are whatever kind of woman I say you are, girl. You belong to this establishment now." Before Amelia could respond, a deep voice cut through the tension like a knife through butter. "No, she does not." Every head turned toward the speaker, a tall cowboy who had been sitting quietly in the corner nursing a whiskey. Amelia had noticed him earlier, primarily because he seemed different from the usual rough clientele. His clothes, though dusty from travel, were well maintained. His dark hair was neatly trimmed beneath his hat, and his blue eyes held an intensity that commanded attention. Warren Owens had been watching the entire shameful transaction with growing disgust. He had come to Julian to deliver a herd of cattle to the local ranchers, and had stopped at the Prairie Rose for a drink, before finding a room for the night. What he had witnessed made his blood boil with a righteous anger he had not felt in years. "This does not concern you, stranger," Chester warned, his hand moving toward the gun at his hip. Warren stood slowly, his 6'2" frame unfolding with the easy grace of a man comfortable with violence but not eager for it. "I am making it my concern. What kind of man accepts another man's daughter as payment for a debt? And what kind of father offers such a thing? The transaction is complete," Chester insisted, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. There was something about the cowboy that suggested crossing him would be a grave mistake. "I will pay the debt," Warren said, pulling a leather pouch from his coat. $300, you said." The saloon had gone completely silent. $300 was more money than most men in that room would see in a year. Chester's eyes widened with greed, but also suspicion. "What is your interest in this girl?" the saloon owner asked. "My interest is in seeing that a woman is not treated like livestock," Warren replied, counting out the gold coins onto the bar with deliberate precision. "Here is your money. The debt is paid. The girl is free to go." Chester scooped up the coins quickly, testing each one with his teeth before nodding. "The debt is settled." Amelia stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. This stranger had just spent a fortune on her behalf, and she did not even know his name. Her mind raced with questions and a deep wariness born of hard experience. Men did not help women without expecting something in return. Warren turned to her, his blue eyes softening slightly. "Gather your things, miss. I will take you somewhere safe." "I do not have things to gather," Amelia said quietly, hating the admission. Everything she owned was in the small room she had shared with her father at the boarding house, and she would rather die than return there. "Then we will leave now," Warren said, gesturing toward the door. Amelia's pride warred with her desperation. "Why would you help me? What do you want from me?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Warren removed his hat, holding it respectfully in his hands, and met her gaze directly. "I want nothing from you, miss. What I saw here tonight was wrong, and I had the means to stop it. That is all." There was something in his voice, a sincerity that Amelia wanted to believe in even as her cynical mind told her to be cautious. But what choice did she have? She could stay in Julian and face the judgment and gossip that would surely follow, or she could trust this stranger and hope his intentions were as honorable as he claimed. "Where would you take me?" she asked. "I have a ranch about 15 miles north of here." "It is not much, just a small operation with cattle and horses, but there is a cabin. You can stay there until you figure out what you want to do next. I give you my word that I will not harm you or ask anything of you that you are not willing to give." The other men in the saloon were watching the exchange with varying expressions of curiosity, skepticism, and in some cases, disappointment. Amelia knew that if she stayed, her reputation would be ruined regardless of whether she actually worked for Chester in the way he had intended. The frontier was harsh on women who found themselves in compromising situations, even through no fault of their own. "Very well," she said finally, lifting her chin with as much dignity as she could muster. "I accept your offer, Mr. Owens, Warren Owens, Amelia Wright." Warren replaced his hat and offered his arm, a gesture so courtly and unexpected that Amelia almost smiled despite the terrible circumstances. She placed her hand lightly on his forearm, feeling the solid muscle beneath the fabric of his shirt, and allowed him to escort her out of the Prairie Rose Saloon. The California night air was cool and crisp, scented with pine and the faint mineral smell of the mountains. Amelia breathed deeply, feeling as though she could finally fill her lungs properly after the suffocating atmosphere of the saloon. The street was mostly empty, just a few horses tied to posts, and the distant sound of a piano from another establishment further down the road. Warren led her to a sturdy-looking buckskin horse tied near the saloon entrance. "His name is Dakota," he said, stroking the animal's nose affectionately. "He is steady and trustworthy, two qualities I value highly." "I can ride," Amelia said, though she eyed the horse with some trepidation. It had been years since she had been on horseback, and her muscles would surely protest after such a long time. "We will ride double tonight," Warren said. "It is dark, and the trail can be treacherous if you do not know it well. Tomorrow I will bring you back to town if you wish to collect anything from the boarding house, and you can ride one of my other horses." He mounted Dakota with easy grace, then extended his hand to help Amelia up. She hesitated for just a moment before accepting, placing her worn boot in the stirrup and allowing him to pull her up behind him. The position was intimate, requiring her to wrap her arms around his waist to keep from falling, and she felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. "Hold tight," Warren said gently, and then they were moving, Dakota's hooves clopping steadily against the hard-packed dirt of Julian's Main Street. As they left the town behind, Amelia found herself relaxing slightly against Warren's back. He rode with confidence, clearly at home on horseback, and Dakota moved with the sure-footedness of an animal that knew the trail well. The moon was nearly full, casting silver light over the landscape and illuminating the scrub brush and granite outcroppings that characterized this part of California. "How long have you had your ranch?" Amelia asked, more to break the silence than from genuine curiosity. "About 4 years now," Warren replied, his voice carrying easily over the sound of the horse's movement. "I bought the land after working as a ranch hand for nearly a decade, saved every penny I could. It is not a grand operation, but it is mine." There was pride in his voice, the satisfaction of a man who had built something through his own labor. Amelia felt a pang of envy. She had never owned anything of value, had never had the opportunity to build a life of her own choosing. "You run the ranch alone?" she asked. "I have a hand who helps during the busy seasons, a young man named Tommy who is eager to learn the trade. But mostly it is just me and the animals. It must be lonely." Warren was quiet for a moment, and Amelia wondered if she had overstepped. But when he spoke again, his voice was thoughtful rather than offended. "Sometimes. But I prefer solitude to bad company. The frontier attracts all kinds, and not all of them are good people." "Like my father," Amelia said bitterly. "I did not say that, but you thought it. Everyone thought it. He used to be a good man before my mother died. He loved her so much that losing her broke something inside him. I watched him transform from a devoted husband and father into a stranger who cared more about the bottom of a whiskey bottle than his own daughter." Warren's back tensed slightly beneath her arms. Grief affects people in different ways, but that does not excuse what he did tonight. A real man protects his family, no matter what pain he is carrying. The conviction in his words suggested he was speaking from personal experience, and Amelia found herself wondering about this stranger, who had so dramatically altered the course of her life. What kind of man carried $300 in gold and spent it without hesitation to help someone he did not know? They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the steady rhythm of Dakota's hooves and the occasional call of a night bird. The trail wound through increasingly rugged terrain, climbing gradually into the foothills. Amelia could see the dark shapes of pine trees against the star-studded sky, and in the distance, the jagged silhouette of the mountains. "We are almost there," Warren said as they crested a small rise. Below them, nestled in a valley with a creek running through it, Amelia could make out the shapes of buildings in the moonlight. As they drew closer, she could see a modest cabin with a stone chimney, a barn that looked sturdy and well-maintained, and several corrals containing horses and cattle. It was a simple setup, but even in the darkness, she could sense the care that had gone into maintaining it. Warren guided Dakota to the cabin and dismounted, then helped Amelia down. Her legs were shaky from the ride, and she stumbled slightly. His hand steadied her, warm and strong against her elbow. "Come inside," he said. "You must be exhausted." Amelia followed him into the cabin, and Warren struck a match to light a kerosene lamp. The warm glow revealed a single large room with a stone fireplace at one end, a simple kitchen area with a wood-burning stove, a table with 2 chairs, and a bed tucked in the far corner. The furnishings were sparse but clean, and Amelia noticed details that suggested a man who took pride in his home despite living alone. Curtains on the windows, books stacked neatly on a shelf, a quilt on the bed that looked handmade. "You can have the bed," Warren said, moving to the fireplace to start a fire. "I will sleep in the barn." "This is your home," Amelia protested. "I cannot take your bed." "You can and you will," Warren said firmly, his tone brooking no argument. "I have slept in worse places than the barn. You have been through an ordeal tonight, and you need proper rest." The kindness in his voice nearly undid her. Amelia felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes, the delayed shock of the evening finally catching up with her. She had been betrayed by her father, nearly sold into a life of degradation, and saved by a stranger who asked nothing in return. It was too much to process all at once. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice breaking slightly. "You do not know me. You owe me nothing. Yet you spent a fortune to free me from that place." Warren turned from the fireplace, where flames were beginning to lick at the kindling. His face was half in shadow, but his eyes were kind as they met hers. "Because it was the right thing to do," he said simply. "And because I know what it feels like to be alone and afraid with nowhere to turn." Before Amelia could respond, Warren moved to a trunk near the bed and pulled out a thick blanket and a clean shirt. "You can use this to sleep in if you like. It will be more comfortable than your dress. There is a basin and pitcher for washing, and if you need anything during the night, I will be in the barn. Just call out." He handed her the items and then moved toward the door, but Amelia found herself speaking before he could leave. "Thank you, Warren. I know those words are inadequate for what you have done, but please know that I am grateful." He nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Get some rest, Amelia. Tomorrow we can figure out what comes next." And then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. Amelia stood alone in the cabin, clutching the shirt and blanket, and for the first time since her mother had died, she felt a tiny flicker of hope. She changed into Warren's shirt, which hung nearly to her knees, and washed her face and hands in the basin. The water was cold but refreshing, and she scrubbed away the smoke and grime of the saloon until her skin felt raw. Then she climbed into the bed, surprised by how comfortable it was. The quilt smelled like pine and leather, and something else she could not quite identify but found comforting nonetheless. As she lay in the darkness, listening to the crackle of the fire and the distant sounds of the ranch animals settling for the night, Amelia tried to make sense of everything that had happened. Her life had been turned completely upside down in the space of a few hours, and she had no idea what the future held. But for now, she was safe, and that was more than she had dared to hope for when her father had announced his intention to settle his debt with her. Sleep came slowly, and when it did, her dreams were troubled with images of the saloon, her father's hollow eyes and Warren's steady blue gaze. She woke to the smell of coffee and bacon, and for a moment, Amelia was completely disoriented. The events of the previous night came flooding back, and she sat up quickly, heart pounding. The cabin was filled with early morning light, and through the window, she could see Warren outside, tending to the animals in one of the corrals. Amelia climbed out of bed and quickly changed back into her dress, though she longed for clean clothes and a proper bath. She stepped outside, squinting in the bright California sunshine, and took her first good look at the ranch in daylight. It was more impressive than she had realized. The cabin was solidly built with a covered porch that looked out over the valley. The barn was large and well-maintained, and the corrals held at least a dozen horses and twice as many cattle. A vegetable garden grew near the cabin, though it needed weeding, and there was even a small chicken coop from which she could hear the soft clucking of hens. Warren saw her and waved, then made his way over, leading a beautiful chestnut mare. He looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes, and Amelia felt a pang of guilt knowing he had spent the night in the barn because of her. "Good morning," he said with a warm smile that transformed his serious face. "I hope you slept well." "Better than I have in months," Amelia admitted. "But you look like you did not sleep at all," Warren shrugged. "I am used to it. Ranch life means early mornings and late nights. I have breakfast ready inside if you are hungry." They walked back to the cabin together, and Amelia found that Warren had prepared a simple but hearty meal of bacon, eggs, and fresh biscuits. Her stomach growled loudly, reminding her that she had not eaten since the previous morning. "This is wonderful," she said between bites. "Where did you learn to cook?" "Trial and error, mostly," Warren said with a chuckle. "When you live alone, you either learn to cook or you starve. I chose the former." They ate in companionable silence for a few moments before Warren spoke again, his tone more serious. "I meant what I said last night. You are welcome to stay here as long as you need. There is plenty of work if you want to earn your keep, but you are not obligated. You are free to leave whenever you choose, though I would be happy to help you figure out your next steps." Amelia set down her fork and looked at him directly. "I need to be honest with you, Warren. I have no money, no prospects, and nowhere to go. My mother's family disowned her when she married my father, and his family is all back east. I have no skills beyond basic household tasks and some experience helping at a general store when I was younger. If I leave here, I will end up right back where I started, or worse." Warren nodded thoughtfully. "What do you want to do? If you could choose any path forward, what would it be?" The question caught Amelia off guard. No one had ever asked her what she wanted before. Her life had always been shaped by circumstances and the decisions of others. "I want to be independent," she said slowly, testing the words as she spoke them. "I want to work hard and earn my own way. I want to never again be in a position where someone else can control my fate." "Those are good goals," Warren said, "and I think I can help you achieve them if you are willing to work. What did you have in mind?" "This ranch needs a lot of things that I do not have time to do properly. The garden needs tending, the cabin could use a woman's touch, and I have been thinking about expanding into chickens and possibly a few dairy cows. If you were willing to take on those tasks, I would pay you a fair wage. You could save your money and eventually buy land of your own or start a business in town, or whatever else you decide you want to do." Amelia's heart began to race with excitement and trepidation. It was a generous offer, almost too generous, and her cautious nature made her suspicious. "And you would ask nothing else of me?" she asked carefully. Warren met her eyes steadily. "I would ask nothing else. You would have the cabin and I would continue to sleep in the barn. Your work would be your own and your wages would be yours to do with as you please. I give you my word as a gentleman that I will not take advantage of you in any way." There was such sincerity in his voice that Amelia found herself believing him despite her better judgment. She thought about her alternatives, which were essentially non-existent, and made her decision. "I accept your offer," she said, extending her hand to shake on it. Warren took her hand, his grip firm but gentle, and Amelia felt an unexpected tingle run up her arm at the contact. She pulled away quickly, telling herself it was just nerves and gratitude, nothing more. "Then we have an agreement," Warren said with satisfaction. "I will ride into Julian today and bring back your belongings from the boarding house, if you can tell me where to find them. I will also pick up some supplies and fabric so you can make yourself some new clothes if you would like." "You do not have to do that," Amelia protested. "I know I do not have to. I want to. Consider it an advance on your wages." Amelia felt tears threatening again and blinked them back furiously. She was not a crier, had trained herself to be tough after her mother's death, but Warren's relentless kindness was breaking down her carefully constructed walls. "Thank you," she managed to say. Warren nodded and stood, clearing the breakfast dishes. "I will leave within the hour. Feel free to explore the ranch and get your bearings. The animals are all friendly, and there is a creek just beyond that stand of trees where the water is clean and cool if you want to wash up properly." After Warren left for town, Amelia spent the morning exploring her new home. She found the creek he had mentioned, a clear stream that ran over smooth stones and was cold enough to make her gasp when she waded in. She washed as best she could, scrubbing away the residue of smoke and fear from the saloon, and felt almost human again by the time she was done. She spent the afternoon surveying the garden, pulling weeds and making mental notes of what needed to be done. The soil was good, and with proper care, it could produce a substantial harvest. She checked the chicken coop and found 6 hens that looked healthy and well-fed, and she collected their eggs, pleased to find nearly a dozen. By the time Warren returned in the late afternoon, driving a wagon loaded with supplies, Amelia had a better sense of the ranch and what it needed. She also had a better sense of what she had gotten herself into. This was not going to be an easy life, but it was honest work, and she would be paid fairly for it. For the first time in years, she felt like she had some control over her destiny. Warren had brought everything she owned from the boarding house, which amounted to 2 more dresses, some undergarments, a hairbrush, and a small box containing her mother's wedding ring and a few other keepsakes. He had also purchased fabric, thread, and several other household items, including a bar of lavender soap that Amelia immediately fell in love with. "I did not see your father at the boarding house," Warren said as he unloaded the wagon. "The landlady said he left early this morning without paying his rent." Amelia felt a mixture of anger and relief. Part of her had hoped her father would come looking for her, would apologize and beg for forgiveness. But a larger part of her knew that chapter of her life was over, and dwelling on it would only cause more pain. "He made his choice," she said quietly, "and I have made mine." Warren looked at her with understanding and perhaps a touch of admiration. "You are stronger than you know, Amelia Wright." The days that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. Amelia woke early each morning and prepared breakfast for both of them, though Warren always insisted on eating quickly and heading out to work the ranch. She spent her days tending the garden, caring for the chickens, and learning the basics of ranch life from Warren during their evening meals. He was a patient teacher, showing her how to recognize signs of illness in the animals, how to mend fences, and how to read the weather by watching the sky and the behavior of the livestock. In return, she transformed the cabin into a proper home, adding touches like wildflowers in a chipped vase, curtains made from the fabric he had bought, and meals that were more elaborate than the simple fare Warren had been eating. But more than the work, Amelia found herself looking forward to the evenings when they would sit on the porch and talk as the sun set over the mountains. Warren told her about his life, how he had grown up in Texas as the youngest of 5 children, how his parents had died in a fever outbreak when he was 17, and how he had drifted west looking for a fresh start. "I wanted land of my own," he explained one evening as they watched the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "I wanted to build something that could not be taken away from me. My family lost everything after my parents died. Creditors came and took the farm, scattered my siblings to the 4 winds. I swore that would never happen to me again." "Is that why you helped me?" Amelia asked. "Because you know what it feels like to lose everything?" Warren was quiet for a long moment, his profile sharp against the twilight. "Partly. But mostly because watching your father treat you like property reminded me of how helpless I felt when the creditors came. I had the power to change your situation. so I did." Amelia felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the evening temperature. She had been living at the ranch for 3 weeks now, and with each passing day, she found herself more drawn to Warren. He was kind without being weak, strong without being domineering, and he treated her with a respect she had never experienced from any man before. She was also beginning to notice small things about him that made her heart beat faster. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the strength in his hands as he worked, the sound of his laugh when she said something that amused him. She told herself it was just gratitude and proximity, that these feelings would fade once she had enough money saved to move on. But deep down, she knew she was lying to herself. Warren, for his part, was experiencing his own internal struggle. He had spent 4 years alone on this ranch, content with his solitude and his work. But having Amelia here had awakened something in him that he had thought long buried. She was beautiful, yes, with her dark hair and expressive brown eyes, but it was more than that. She was resilient and brave, facing each new challenge with determination. She was quick-witted and had a dry sense of humor that caught him off guard and made him laugh more than he had in years. He found himself looking forward to the end of each day, when he could sit with her and talk about anything and everything. He noticed the small ways she had made the cabin more comfortable, the care she took with the animals, and the pride she felt in her accomplishments. And he noticed, though he tried not to, the curve of her neck when she bent over her sewing, the sound of her humming as she worked in the garden, and the way her face lit up when she smiled at him. It was dangerous territory, these feelings he was developing. He had promised her respect and nothing more, had given his word that he would not take advantage of her vulnerable position. But it was getting harder to ignore the pull he felt toward her, the desire to know her better, to protect her, to make her smile. One evening in early autumn, about 2 months after Amelia had come to live at the ranch, Warren was working on repairing a section of fence when his hand slipped, and the wire he was working with cut deeply into his palm. He cursed and grabbed a handkerchief to stanch the bleeding, but the cut was deep and would not stop flowing. Amelia, who had been working in the garden nearby, heard his exclamation and came running. She took one look at his hand and immediately took charge. "Come to the cabin," she ordered. "That needs to be cleaned and bandaged properly." Warren allowed himself to be led inside, where Amelia heated water and retrieved the medical supplies he kept in a small trunk. She worked efficiently, cleaning the wound with steady hands despite the blood, and then wrapped it tightly with clean cloth. "You need to be more careful," she scolded gently as she worked. "That could have been much worse." "Yes, Mother," Warren said with a hint of teasing in his voice, then immediately regretted it when he saw her stiffen. But to his surprise, Amelia laughed. "I suppose I did sound rather bossy just then. But honestly, Warren, you take care of everyone and everything on this ranch. Someone needs to take care of you." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, something electric and undeniable. Warren was acutely aware of how close she was, of her hand still holding his injured one, of the concern in her eyes. He wanted nothing more than to pull her close, to kiss her, and tell her that he had been falling for her since the moment she had looked at him with such fierce dignity in that terrible saloon. But he had made a promise, and Warren Owens was a man of his word. So instead, he gently pulled his hand away and stood up, putting distance between them. "Thank you for tending to me," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "I should get back to work." Amelia watched him go, her heart racing and her cheeks flushed. She had seen something in his eyes just then, something that made her think he might feel the same confusing jumble of emotions that she did. But he had pulled away, and she told herself it was for the best. She was here to work and save money, not to complicate both their lives with feelings that might not be returned. But that night, as she lay in the cabin and listened to the sounds of the ranch settling for the evening, Amelia could not stop thinking about the moment they had shared. She had never felt this way about anyone before. She had been so focused on survival after her mother's death that romance had seemed like a luxury she could not afford. But now, living in close quarters with a man who treated her with such kindness and respect, she was discovering that her heart was not as practical as she had believed. The next few weeks were slightly awkward as both Warren and Amelia tried to navigate the growing tension between them. They were unfailingly polite to each other, but some of the easy camaraderie they had developed was replaced with a careful distance. They still ate meals together and talked in the evenings, but there was an unspoken agreement to avoid topics that felt too personal or intimate. It was Tommy, Warren's occasional ranch hand, who finally forced the issue. The young man arrived in late October to help with some repairs before winter set in, and he immediately noticed the atmosphere between Warren and Amelia. "So, when are you two getting married?" he asked bluntly one afternoon while he and Warren were mending the barn roof. Warren nearly dropped his hammer. "What are you talking about?" Tommy, who was 19 and possessed the straightforward honesty of youth, looked at his employer like he was being deliberately dense. "You and Miss Amelia. It is obvious you are sweet on each other. Anyone with eyes can see it." "It is not that simple," Warren said, focusing intently on the shingle he was hammering down. "Amelia works for me. I gave her my word that I would not take advantage of her situation." "How is it taking advantage if she feels the same way?" Tommy asked. "And she does, by the way. I have seen how she looks at you when she thinks no one is watching." Warren sat back on his heels, his heart suddenly pounding. "What do you mean?" "I mean she looks at you the way my sister looked at her husband before they got married. Like you hung the moon and stars. And you look at her the same way, boss. So why are you both dancing around it?" "Because I do not want her to feel obligated," Warren said slowly, voicing the fear that had been holding him back. "She came here because she had nowhere else to go. I do not want her to think she has to return my feelings out of gratitude or because she depends on me for her livelihood." Tommy shook his head. "With all due respect, boss, that is the stupidest thing I have ever heard. Miss Amelia is not the kind of woman who would pretend to have feelings she does not have. If she cares for you, it is because of who you are, not what you provide. You should talk to her." Warren knew the young man was right, but fear held him back. What if Amelia did not feel the same way? What if he had misread the situation and confessing his feelings made her uncomfortable? She might feel obligated to leave, and the thought of her absence had become unbearable. But that night, fate took the decision out of his hands. A storm rolled in from the mountains, bringing heavy rain and lightning that lit up the sky like daylight. Warren was securing the animals in the barn when he heard Amelia scream. He ran toward the cabin, his heart in his throat, and found her standing on the porch, pointing toward the western pasture. Through the sheets of rain, he could see what had alarmed her. Lightning had struck a tree, and it was on fire despite the downpour. Worse, the wind was blowing sparks toward the dry grass that separated the burning tree from the barn. Warren did not hesitate. He grabbed buckets and shovels and ran toward the fire, with Amelia right behind him. They worked frantically in the rain and mud, digging a fire break and dousing sparks before they could spread. The storm helped, the rain gradually soaking everything until the danger had passed, but not before both of them were exhausted, soaked to the bone and covered in mud and ash. When it was finally over, they stood in the rain looking at each other, and suddenly, Warren started to laugh. Amelia joined in, and soon they were both doubled over, laughing with the relief of people who had just survived a crisis. "You look like you wrestled a pig," Amelia said between gasps of laughter. "You do not look much better," Warren replied, reaching out to wipe a smudge of ash from her cheek. The gesture was gentle, almost tender, and the laughter died away as they stood there in the rain, his hand still touching her face. The storm continued to rage around them, but in that moment they were in their own world. "Amelia," Warren said, his voice barely audible over the rain. "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" "I am breaking my promise. The one I made when you first came here about not asking anything of you that you were not willing to give." Amelia's heart began to race. "What are you asking?" "I am asking for your heart," Warren said, his blue eyes intense and vulnerable in the lightning flashes. "Because you already have mine. I have been fighting these feelings for weeks, telling myself it was wrong to feel this way, that I was taking advantage. But tonight, when I heard you scream and thought something had happened to you, I realized that I cannot keep pretending I do not care for you. I am in love with you, Amelia Wright, and I need to know if there is any chance you might feel the same way." For a moment, Amelia could not breathe. The words she had been longing to hear but never dared hope for hung in the air between them, and she felt tears mixing with the rain on her cheeks. "You are in love with me," she whispered. "Desperately," Warren confirmed. "But if you do not feel the same, I will respect that. You will always have a place here, and I will never mention this again if that is what you want." "Warren," Amelia said, reaching up to cup his face with both hands, "I have been in love with you since the night you paid my father's debt and took me away from that horrible place. Maybe even since the moment you stood up in that saloon and said I did not belong to anyone. You are the best man I have ever known, and loving you is the easiest thing I have ever done." Warren's face transformed with joy, and then he was pulling her close, his lips finding hers in a kiss that was full of promise and passion, and the pent-up longing of weeks of denial. Amelia kissed him back with everything she had, her fingers tangling in his wet hair, her body pressed against his. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Warren rested his forehead against hers. "I want to do this right. I want to court you properly, take you to dances in town, let everyone know my intentions are honorable." "Your intentions are honorable," Amelia said with a smile. "But I do not need courtship and dances. I need you, and I need to know that this is real, that we can build a life together." "It is real," Warren promised. "As real as this ranch, as real as the sunrise. I want to marry you, Amelia. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep next to you every night. I want to build this ranch with you and maybe, if you want, raise a family. But only if that is what you want too." "It is everything I want," Amelia said, kissing him again. "Everything I never dared to dream of." They stood in the rain for a few more moments, holding each other, before Warren laughed and pulled back. "We should get inside before we both catch pneumonia. That would be a terrible way to start our life together." They ran to the cabin, shedding their muddy boots on the porch, and Warren built up the fire while Amelia changed into dry clothes. When she emerged from behind the changing screen wearing one of his shirts and a pair of his work pants rolled up at the ankles, Warren thought she had never looked more beautiful. "I suppose I should return to the barn," he said reluctantly, not wanting to leave her but mindful of propriety. "You absolutely should not," Amelia said firmly. "You are soaked through and exhausted. You will sleep in your own bed for once, and I will make up a pallet near the fire." "Amelia, we are getting married," she interrupted. "You just proposed and I accepted. I think we can manage to sleep in the same room without scandal, especially since no one is here to see it anyway." Warren could not argue with her logic, and truthfully, he was too tired and too happy to want to. He changed into dry clothes while Amelia made a comfortable bed near the fire, and they settled in, talking quietly until they both drifted off to sleep. When Warren woke in the morning, he found that Amelia had abandoned her pallet during the night and was curled up in his arms, her head resting on his chest. She looked peaceful in sleep, younger than her 22 years, and Warren felt his heart swell with love and protectiveness. He had spent so many years alone, focused solely on building his ranch and his future. He had never imagined finding someone who would fit so perfectly into his life, who would make him want things he had long ago given up on. Amelia stirred and opened her eyes, and for a moment confusion crossed her face before memory returned. Then she smiled, a radiant expression that made Warren catch his breath. "Good morning," she said softly. "Good morning," he replied, tightening his arms around her. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than I ever have," she admitted. "Your pallet was comfortable, but your arms were better." They lay there for a while longer, reluctant to break the spell of the moment, before practical concerns intruded. The animals needed tending, breakfast needed making, and there was still cleanup to do from the previous night's storm. But everything felt different now, charged with promise and possibility. As they worked side by side that day, they made plans for their future. Warren wanted to ride into Julian the following week to speak with the preacher about arranging a wedding. Amelia wanted something simple, just the two of them and perhaps Tommy as a witness, and Warren readily agreed. "I do not need a fancy ceremony," Amelia said as they surveyed the damage from the fire, which was thankfully minimal. "I just need you." Warren pulled her close and kissed the top of her head. "You have me, Amelia, for as long as you want me." "Then I have you forever," she replied. The following week, they rode into Julian together, and Warren made good on his promise. The preacher, a kindly older man named Reverend Matthews, agreed to perform the ceremony the following Saturday. Word spread quickly through the small town, and while there was some gossip about the unconventional courtship, most people seemed genuinely happy for them. Mrs. Henderson, who ran the general store, took Amelia aside when they came in to buy supplies. "I heard what happened at the saloon," the older woman said quietly. "What your father did was shameful, but what Warren did was honorable. You have found yourself a good man, dear. Hold on to him." "I intend to," Amelia replied, her eyes finding Warren across the store. On the day of the wedding, Amelia wore a dress she had sewn herself from the blue fabric Warren had bought months ago. It was simple but elegant, and when Warren saw her standing in the little church with wildflowers in her hair, he thought she was the most beautiful sight he had ever seen. The ceremony was short and sweet, with Tommy and Mrs. Henderson serving as witnesses. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Warren kissed Amelia with a tenderness that brought tears to the eyes of everyone present. They spent their wedding night in the cabin that had become their shared home, and Warren proved to be as gentle and considerate a husband as Amelia had imagined. They lay together afterwards, wrapped in each other's arms, and talked about their dreams for the future. "I want to expand the ranch," Warren said, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her arm. "Maybe buy some more land, increase the herd, but I also want to make sure we have time to enjoy life, to build memories together." "I want children eventually," Amelia said. "Not right away, but someday. I want to give them the kind of childhood I had before my mother died, full of love and security." "How many children?" Warren asked with amusement. "As many as we are blessed with," Amelia replied, "but at least 2 so they can have each other." Warren kissed her forehead. "That sounds perfect. Everything about us, is perfect." The first year of their marriage was full of hard work and happiness. They expanded the vegetable garden, added more chickens, and Warren bought 2 dairy cows as he had planned. Amelia proved to be a natural rancher, taking to the work with enthusiasm and learning quickly. They worked side by side during the day and fell into each other's arms at night, their love growing deeper with each passing month. Tommy became a more regular presence on the ranch, and Warren began training him with the intention of eventually making him a partner. The young man was hardworking and loyal, and he treated Amelia with the respect due his employer's wife. In the spring of 1874, nearly 2 years after that fateful night in the Prairie Rose Saloon, Amelia discovered she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but wanted to be certain before telling Warren. When she finally shared the news over breakfast one morning, Warren's reaction was everything she had hoped for. He swept her up in his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests, and then set her down gently, his hands immediately going to her still flat stomach. "Are you certain?" he asked, his voice full of wonder. "As certain as I can be without seeing a doctor," Amelia replied. "But yes, I am certain." Warren kissed her, long and deep and sweet. "You have made me the happiest man alive." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Warren became almost comically overprotective, insisting that Amelia rest more and work less. She tolerated his hovering with good humor, understanding that it came from a place of love and concern. On a cold December day, with snow falling softly outside and a fire roaring in the fireplace, Amelia gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Warren was by her side the entire time, holding her hand and whispering words of encouragement, and when the baby finally arrived, screaming lustily, Warren had tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect," he said, carefully taking the baby from the midwife and cradling him against his chest. "Absolutely perfect." They named him James, after Warren's father, and the baby transformed their lives in ways both expected and surprising. Warren proved to be a devoted father, getting up for nighttime feedings and changings without complaint, and singing lullabies in a surprisingly pleasant baritone. Amelia watched her husband with their son and fell in love with him all over again. This was the life she had dreamed of during those dark months after her mother's death, when her father was descending into alcoholism and despair. This was the happiness she had thought lost to her forever on that terrible night when she had been left at the saloon like an unwanted possession. 3 years after James was born, Amelia gave birth to twin girls, Mary and Elizabeth. The ranch was full of noise and laughter, and though the work was harder with 3 small children underfoot, neither Warren nor Amelia would have changed a thing. One evening, when the children were finally asleep and Warren and Amelia sat on the porch watching the sunset, Amelia thought back to that first night. "You ever regret it?" she asked. "Spending all that money to buy my freedom. Your life would be simpler if you had just walked away." Warren looked at her, his expression tender. "Simpler, maybe, but infinitely less rich. You and our children are the best investment I ever made. That $300 bought me everything I did not know I needed." "I love you," Amelia said, leaning against his shoulder. "I love you too," Warren replied. "More than I can ever adequately express." As they sat there in the gathering darkness, surrounded by the land they had built together and the family they had created, Amelia thought about how far she had come from that desperate young woman in the saloon. She had found not just survival, but a thriving life full of purpose and love. The ranch continued to prosper over the years. Tommy eventually married a local girl and built his own cabin on the property, becoming a full partner as Warren had planned. The children grew strong and healthy, learning the value of hard work and the importance of treating others with respect and kindness. James showed an early aptitude for working with horses, and by the time he was 10, he could gentle even the most skittish animal. Mary inherited her mother's practical nature and her father's head for business, while Elizabeth was the dreamer of the family, always finding wonder in the simple things of ranch life. Warren and Amelia made it a point to take trips into Julian regularly, attending church services and social gatherings. Amelia had initially been nervous about facing the townspeople, worried about the gossip and judgment she had faced after the incident at the saloon. But Warren's steady presence and the obvious happiness of their marriage gradually won people over. Mrs. Henderson remained a good friend, and she often told anyone who would listen about how romantic she thought it was that Warren had swept in and rescued Amelia. The story became something of a local legend, embellished and retold until it bore only a passing resemblance to the actual events. But neither Warren nor Amelia minded. They knew the truth of what had happened and what they had built together. As the years passed, Amelia sometimes wondered what had become of her father. She had never seen or heard from Henry Wright after that night, and while the wound of his betrayal had healed, it had left a scar. She hoped he had found some measure of peace, had stopped drinking and gambling, had perhaps rebuilt his life somewhere. But she had learned not to dwell on things she could not control or change. One day, when Amelia was 35 and Warren was approaching 40, a stranger rode up to the ranch. He was an older man, thin and weathered, with haunted eyes that looked familiar despite the years that had passed. "Amelia," the man said hesitantly as she came out of the cabin to see who had arrived. She knew him instantly, though he looked 20 years older than when she had last seen him. "Father." Henry Wright climbed down from his horse, moving like a man much older than his 50-odd years. "I did not know if you would even be here. I had to ask around Julian to find out where you were living." Warren emerged from the barn, his body language protective as he took in the stranger. Then he saw Amelia's face and understood who this must be. "What do you want?" Amelia asked, her voice cooler than she felt. A storm of emotions was raging inside her. Anger, hurt, and underneath it all, a small spark of the love she had once felt for the man who had been a good father before tragedy had broken him. "I wanted to see you," Henry said, his voice rough with emotion. "I wanted to apologize for what I did, though I know there are no words that can make it right. I have been sober for 3 years now, and I have been working on a ranch up north. I saved some money, and I wanted to repay the debt, to give you the money that was used to buy your freedom." He held out a leather pouch, which clinked with the sound of coins. Amelia looked at the pouch but did not take it. "I do not want your money, Father. I am not sure I even know what I want from you." "I do not deserve your forgiveness," Henry said, and tears began to run down his weathered cheeks. "What I did was unforgivable. I let my grief and my addiction turn me into a monster. I lost myself after your mother died, and in the process, I lost you. But I want you to know that not a day has gone by that I have not regretted my actions. Not a day that I have not thought about you and prayed that you were safe and happy." Warren moved to stand beside Amelia, his hand finding hers and squeezing gently. She drew strength from his presence, from the solid reality of the life they had built together. "I am happy," she said finally. "This is my husband, Warren Owens. We have 3 children and a successful ranch. I have everything I ever wanted, no thanks to you." The words were harsh, but they were honest. Henry nodded, accepting them as his due. "I am glad," he said simply. "Truly, Amelia, I am glad you found happiness. It is more than I deserve to know." There was a long silence, broken only by the sound of the wind in the trees and the distant lowing of cattle. Amelia looked at her father, really looked at him, and saw a broken man who had been trying to piece himself back together. She thought about the years of bitterness she had carried, the anger that sometimes still surfaced in the dark of night. And then she thought about her children, about the love she had for them, and the lengths she would go to protect them. She thought about Warren, and how he had shown her that it was possible to overcome the past and build something new. She thought about the person she had become, not in spite of what her father had done, but perhaps partially because of it. "I do not know if I can forgive you," she said honestly. "Not yet, and maybe not ever. But I can tell you that I am not angry anymore. I have moved past what happened, and I have built a good life. What you did was terrible, but in a strange way, it led me to exactly where I needed to be." Henry's face crumpled with a mixture of relief and sorrow. "That is more than I had hoped for. Thank you, Amelia." Warren spoke for the first time, his voice measured. "You are welcome to water your horse and rest for a bit before you head back to wherever you came from, but I think it would be best if you did not stay long. This is our home, and we have worked hard to build a peaceful life here." "I understand," Henry said. "I will leave shortly. But before I go, may I see my grandchildren?" Just for a moment, Amelia hesitated, looking to Warren for guidance. He squeezed her hand again, leaving the decision to her. "They are playing in the barn," she said finally. "You may see them, but from a distance. I will not introduce you as their grandfather. They do not know about you, and I am not sure I am ready to explain." "That is more than fair," Henry said. They walked to the barn where James, Mary, and Elizabeth were playing some game that involved a lot of running and laughter. Henry watched them from the doorway, his face a mask of longing and regret. "They are beautiful," he whispered. "They look happy." "They are," Amelia confirmed. "They are safe and loved, and they will never know what it is like to be treated as anything less than precious." The rebuke was clear, and Henry accepted it with a nod. A few minutes later, he was mounting his horse and preparing to leave. But before he rode away, he turned back to Amelia one last time. "I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but would it be acceptable if I wrote to you occasionally? Not often, just to let you know I am still sober, still trying to be a better man." Amelia considered the request. Part of her wanted to say no, to cut ties completely and never think about her father again. But a larger part of her, the part that had learned compassion and grace from Warren's example, could not quite bring herself to shut that door completely. "You may write," she said. "But I make no promises about whether I will write back." "That is fair," Henry said. "Thank you, Amelia. And thank you, Mr. Owens, for taking care of my daughter when I failed to do so." Warren nodded, his arm around Amelia's waist. "She is my wife and the love of my life. Taking care of her is not a burden, it is a privilege." After Henry had ridden away, Amelia stood watching the dust settle on the road for a long time. Warren waited patiently, knowing she needed time to process the encounter. "Are you all right?" he asked eventually. "I think so," Amelia said. "It was hard to see him, but I am glad I did. It gave me some closure, I think, and it reminded me of how far I have come." "You are an extraordinary woman," Warren said, pulling her close. "I am constantly amazed by your strength and grace." "I learned it from you," Amelia replied, turning in his arms to face him. "You showed me what it means to be treated with respect and kindness. You gave me the space to heal and grow. I am only who I am now because of you." Warren kissed her softly. "We made each other better." "That is what love is supposed to do." They stood there holding each other while their children's laughter echoed from the barn, and Amelia thought about how blessed she was. From the lowest point of her life, abandoned and frightened in a saloon, she had risen to build something beautiful and lasting. Henry did right, as he had said he would. The letters came every few months, simple accounts of his life and his continued sobriety. Amelia read them but rarely responded, though after a year, she did send a brief note acknowledging his letters and letting him know she and her family were well. It was a small gesture, but it felt like the right thing to do. Life on the ranch continued to be full and rich. The children grew older, each developing their own distinct personalities and dreams. James eventually took over much of the day-to-day running of the ranch, freeing Warren to pursue some other interests he had neglected over the years. He began breeding horses with an eye toward quality rather than just quantity, developing a reputation for producing some of the finest animals in Southern California. Mary surprised everyone by developing a passion for medicine after helping Warren tend to an injured ranch hand. She eventually traveled to San Francisco to study nursing, something that would have been difficult for a woman of her generation, but was made possible by the money Warren and Amelia had carefully saved. She returned to Julian to practice, serving the community and making her parents proud beyond measure. Elizabeth, true to her dreamy nature, became a teacher and married a young lawyer who had moved to town from back east. They built a house in Julian and gave Warren and Amelia their first grandchild, a boy they named Warren in honor of his grandfather. As Warren and Amelia grew older, they often sat on the porch in the evenings, watching the sunset just as they had done when they were young newlyweds. Their hands were more gnarled now, marked by years of hard work, but they still fit together perfectly. "Do you ever think about how different things might have been?" Amelia asked one evening when they were both in their 60s. "If you had not been in that saloon that night, or if you had decided not to intervene." "Sometimes," Warren admitted, "but I cannot imagine my life without you in it. Everything I have, everything I am has been shaped by you. So no, I do not regret a single moment, not even the hardships. They all led us here." Amelia leaned her head on his shoulder, a gesture as familiar and comfortable as breathing. "I love you, Warren Owens. I loved you when you were a young cowboy willing to risk everything for a stranger. I love you now as an old man who built an empire with his bare hands. And I will love you until my last breath." "And I love you," Warren replied, kissing the top of her head. "My brave, beautiful Amelia, you were never payment for a debt. You were a gift, the greatest treasure I could have ever found." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge, the same stars that had witnessed their first kiss in the rain, their wedding vows, the births of their children, and every triumph and challenge in between. The ranch spread out before them, a testament to their hard work and dedication, but more importantly, a physical manifestation of the love they had built together. Inside the cabin, they could hear the sounds of family, James and his wife preparing dinner, grandchildren running and playing. Outside, the land they had worked so hard to tame stretched toward the mountains, fertile and productive. But the real wealth was not in the land or the livestock, or even the thriving family they had created. The real wealth was in the bond between them, forged in adversity and strengthened by years of love, respect, and partnership. Warren had taken a chance on a desperate young woman in a saloon, seeing her worth when others saw only a commodity. Amelia had trusted a stranger when she had every reason to be cynical and afraid. Together, they had built something beautiful from the broken pieces of their pasts. Years continued to pass, and eventually, the children took over running the ranch entirely. Warren and Amelia moved into a smaller house they had built nearby, content to watch their legacy continue without them at the helm. They had earned their rest, and they enjoyed it, spending their days reading, gardening, and entertaining the ever-growing number of grandchildren who loved to hear stories about the old days. Amelia lived to see her 78th birthday, surrounded by 3 children, 12 grandchildren, and 4 great-grandchildren. She passed away peacefully in her sleep with Warren holding her hand, just as she had wished. Warren followed her less than a year later, unable and unwilling to continue without the woman who had been his partner for over 50 years. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, their graves marked with simple stones that bore their names and the dates of their births and deaths. But the real monument to their lives was not made of stone. It was in the thriving ranch that continued to operate under James's capable management. It was in Mary's medical practice that had saved countless lives over the years. It was in Elizabeth's students who had gone on to make their own marks on the world. Most of all, it was in the love that had started on a terrible night in a Julian saloon and had grown into something magnificent and enduring. The story of how Warren Owens had rescued Amelia Wright from a life of degradation, and how they had fallen in love became part of family lore, passed down through generations. But the most important part of the story was not the dramatic rescue or even the happy ending. It was the quiet, everyday choice they had made to love, respect, and support each other through all of life's challenges. Years after both Warren and Amelia had passed, their great-great-granddaughter found a box in the attic of the old cabin, which had been preserved as a piece of family history. Inside were letters, photographs, and a worn leather journal that had belonged to Amelia. The young woman sat on the porch of the cabin, now over 100 years old but still standing strong, and read her ancestors' words. One passage, written on Amelia's 50th wedding anniversary, captured the essence of what their life together had meant. I began my life with Warren as a woman with nothing, not even hope. He gave me everything without asking for anything in return. He showed me that love is not about possession or debt, but about two people choosing each other every single day. We have built a life together that is rich beyond measure, not in gold or land, but in moments of joy, shared laughter, and the comfort of knowing we face whatever comes together. If I could go back to that frightened girl in the saloon, I would tell her that the worst night of her life was about to become the best. I would tell her to trust the blue-eyed cowboy who looks at her with respect rather than greed. I would tell her that love, real love, is worth every risk. And I would tell her that the life waiting for her is more beautiful than any dream she could imagine. The young woman closed the journal with tears in her eyes, understanding for the first time the depth of the love story that had shaped her family. The ranch was still there, expanded and modernized, but still bearing the mark of Warren and Amelia's vision. The values they had instilled in their children, and their children's children still guided the family. Hard work, integrity, compassion, and above all, respect for the dignity and worth of every person. As the sun set over the California mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, the young woman thought about her ancestors and the legacy they had left. It was a legacy built not on a dramatic moment of rescue, though that was certainly part of the story, but on 50 years of quiet devotion, mutual respect, and enduring love. Warren and Amelia Owens had proven that even the worst circumstances could be transformed into something beautiful. They had shown that love could heal old wounds, that respect could rebuild broken dignity, and that two people working together could create something far greater than either could achieve alone. Their story was a reminder that sometimes the most powerful acts of heroism are not grand gestures, but simple choices to see another person's worth and honor it. The ranch would continue for generations more, a living testament to what they had built together. But more important than any physical legacy was the example they had set. That true love is built on respect, that partnership means choosing each other every day, and that from even the darkest moments, beauty and joy can bloom. Their story, which had begun with disgust at injustice and compassion for a stranger, had become an epic romance that proved the transformative power of love and respect. And so the story that had started in a smoky saloon in Julian, California in 1872, echoed through the decades, inspiring each new generation to believe in the possibility of love, the importance of dignity, and the truth that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places. Warren and Amelia had lived there happily ever after, not because life was always easy or perfect, but because they faced it together with love, commitment, and an unwavering dedication to honoring each other. Their love story, forged in adversity and strengthened through years of devotion, became the foundation upon which an entire family and a prosperous ranch were built, a legacy that would endure long after they were gone.